Right, okay. Well, apparently some of the drama less accurate and the conclusion perhaps lacking a little for plausibility. But the rituals and the nature of the process is apparently incredibly accurate. So, and with some stunning performances from Ralph Fiennes and Stanley Tucci, a personal favourite, and Isabella Rossellini, of course, in there. So I advocate for you, if you want a little pomp and ceremony, and to understand the inner workings of the selection of a replacement pope, you probably can't do much better. How are we doing for our recording?
Just about there. Just about there. Okay, we can make a start.
We can go? Awesome. So I want to start by referencing a quote from Michael Sandel, who was a philosophy professor at Princeton and may not now be, depending on where Trump's at with regards to academia in the US. But he's talking about inequality. And this is the debate sort of 10 years ago, really, where this popped up. And he said it's not just that inequality is unfair to those at the bottom. It's that too great a gap between the haves and the have-nots hollows out civic life. It diminishes the possibility that we can share and live a common life, sufficient to foster shared values, sufficient to the kind of life and kind of citizenship wherein we can deliberate about common purposes and ends. And if I have a vision for how community might work, it lies somewhere in this thought from Michael Sandel. And not as a kind of one nation Tory. You know, I think there are lots of ways there can be multiple kind of nested and connected and overlapping communities within a shared nation or place. In the way that, you know, I might look at Christchurch and see that it's somewhere that I know, I can navigate it without Google Maps, I can drive around, I know where some things are, it's familiar, the people talk the same language, but they've got very different rituals and nostalgias and histories than I have. So there's that loose, tight kind of connection. But this idea that there is a common fabric, that there is a common life, that there is some places where we connect with each other that are routine to us, seems to me to lie at the heart of how we can be as people together. And I think about Dunedin, where there's a library that I use occasionally, a swimming pool that I love, a sports stadium I wouldn't have the faintest clue about how to buy tickets to get into. Don't even know where the parking is. But I'm really happy that that stadium is there for the people for whom these sports are an important thing. We come together, me and those sports-loving people, at the Dunedin City Council long-term planning, where we talk with each other and with council in this shared way about the things that we want as a community. Long-term planning happens kind of annually, but every 10 years or so. Swimming, if I get it right, is every Friday morning. So I do dress a lot better for the DCC hearings, it has to be said, than I do for the Mosgiel pool. But so there is this loose, tight relationship around social fabrics. We're not all living exactly the same life in exactly the same way all of the time. But on our core things, we have to have togetherness. Or there is no we, there is no us. And embedded in this is also the idea that the contribution each of us must make if there is to be a common life. In Anglophone countries, there is a general duty of care. And it's not a passive thing, it's an active thing. You can't walk past somebody injured on a pavement and not do nothing without expecting to get some sort of attention back. So, when we talk about resentment, you know, the antithesis of that is this idea of connection, and I want to play with both of those ideas tonight. Augustine of Hippo, familiar to us all, I'm sure, 1500 years ago, described resentment as like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Yeah. And 1,000 and something years later, Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Nothing on earth consumes a man more quickly than the poison, the passion of resentment." The dictionary definition is that it's ill will stemming from a feeling of having been wronged. And I want to drill into this idea that it's not necessarily about having been wronged, it's about feeling that you've been wronged. So I think resentment is, by all of these definitions, an outsider's emotion. That is to say, people experiencing resentment feel like an outsider. And the reason this is a problem is because being inside is so critical to human functioning. We are social animals, first and foremost, and because human psychology is extremely adept at having us all feel that we are in the right, always, and the rule in my household when we have marital disputes is that Katie, my partner, may not be right, but she's never wrong. And it's a lifesaver. Yeah. So being right, being wrong is shameful. It's exclusionary. It's a very uncomfortable feeling, and it's a tiny step from being an outsider or feeling like an outsider to determining that it is the fault of the other person that we feel like this. If we've been embarrassed or brought low or done dirty, we feel like our rightness, the core goodness of us, has been refused in some way. And so we see today the extraordinary circumstance internationally of people who are very much in power, nevertheless claiming this outsider's loss. Currently there are 2 billionaires running a sizable portion of the world into the ground, operating almost exclusively from resentment. And I cannot think of a more elite class of person than somebody who is a billionaire. How is that not the ruling class? And along with that, of course, we need to consider those who have previously been, and everybody will agree about this, on the out, who have perhaps migrated into power to be able to say what is acceptable and what is not, particularly on the left of politics. We see the social dominance of a kind of rights-based entitlement claim. Women who now dominate tertiary education in every single profession. Yeah. Rainbow whānau who have some special protection under the law, although I see Winston Peters is doing his best now to disassemble that. And yet in my life, plenty of professional women who still complain. Plenty of rainbow people who still complain. Why is it not enough? When is it enough? Why do some powerful people live in a state of grievance? And of course, Michael Lernick for the win here. And for those who haven't brought their spectacles out tonight, thank you. It's the comic says, warning, this is an inclusive society, and if we think you are talking, thinking or behaving in a non-inclusive way, you will be excluded. Yeah. Do we not find ourselves here all the time now? So why do people want to be victims? Because it seems to me that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all of the others, Fox News, they're very dedicated to the idea that they are and represent a group of people who have been wronged. I don't have a straight line theory, but I want to chuck some thoughts out there. Let's start with Dunbar's number. It's the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom we can maintain stable social relationships. Proposed in the 1990s by Robin Dunbar, and he was able to describe a direct correlation between primate brain size and average social group size. The larger the social group, the larger the brain. For humans, he said this was around 150 people or so. We can maintain intimacy with about 150 people. Subsequent researchers, Bernard Kilworth, said the median was 231 with an average of 290. But regardless, a relatively small number, 300 or so. The size of a couple of hapu living in a marae. The size of the small villages that used to exist. Whatever the exact number is, we now live and work in social groups much, much larger. If you work at the University of Otago, depending on how they count it, there are around 10,000 warm bodies who turn up every day and get some kind of payment for working there. Not all of them full-time, obviously. But, mass organisations, if we look at Te Whataora South, 4,000 to 5,000 people. My agency is a medium-sized for Dunedin, small on a national scale. We have 65 staff and 65 contractors. We are hitting some of those limits in what is a relatively small organisation. And of course everybody who works there has family, hobbies. They've got other groups of people making up this number. So whatever the number is, we're living and working in these social groups that are much, much, much larger, and it's likely that we use what are called sorting mechanisms, also known as heuristics or shortcuts, to sort these people. And increasingly we'll be sorting them into innies and outies. Yes, people are friends and people are associates. People we worry about and people we gossip about. Yes. And this is a basic evolutionary mechanism for survival, but it lays the groundwork in modern society for them and us. Second, thought that I want to throw at you is the evolution of morality as a way of protecting people from victimisation. This idea that there are basic rights and wrongs, often based on deep ideas of dignity, both the collective and the individual. And in part, we need this because historically, within human society, we have been more prey than we have been predator. If we look back to before the Industrial Revolution, which is only 300-400 years, so it's a blink of an eye, 4% of the population were in the feudal lord class, and 96% of the population were being effectively serfs for their ownership class. So I just want to introduce you to the idea that for the bulk of human society, we have not been lords and ladies. We have been slaves and servants. Today's morality, of course, very much revolves around concern of victimhood and harm, but gets hung on the kind of fork in the road, which is the inherent tension between individual and group rights, which is why we have a justice system. So perceived victimhood forms the core of moral judgments. People condemn acts based on how much they seem to victimise others. So victimhood becomes a signalling device. If I can get sympathy because I can signal a victimhood, it brings me some power, regardless of whether that victimhood is factual, if it can be performed or presented, it can derive power from it. So we use these signalling devices as social animals to tell each other what to think. And interestingly, a lot of genuinely traumatised people do not undertake that signalling. They go inward. They hide their pain and shame. At its extreme, this signalling can be read as a licence to selfishness. This victimhood can be a two-edged sword. It can inflame division. And in the States, we see a lot of now a discourse around my rights as a Christian are being negated by your rights to be transgender. Yes, I am offended that you exist. I am the victim. But it can also, when it works well, bridge divides through sharing and acknowledging suffering within communities. So, why do otherwise powerful people want to look like victims? Selfishness. To become powerful. It's leverage. And once there, of course, it is, as Nietzsche says, it becomes all-consuming. Grievance and resentment are self-reinforcing ecosystems. I suspect that this era that we're going through now is different, not in the numbers of people willing to be resentful. Got to remember, Augustine was talking about this 1500 years ago. It's not new. But that we perhaps now have conditions that permit resentment to dominate. And here we're talking about the media. And I listened recently to a very interesting Australian podcast about Rupert Murdoch and how he built his media empire. And very clearly, what he learned and what he's taught the rest of the media ecosystem to do is to hack the part of the brain that processes feelings, called the amygdala, and the limbic systems that stimulate our arousal and our fight or flight, to make money from them. Research shows that negative news creates higher click-through rates, more time spent per article, and more social media shares than positive news stories. And then beyond that, we have social media. Social media hasn't connected us more. What it's done is it's created greater insularity. If you use YouTube or Blue Sky or X or Facebook or Instagram or any of those, what you'll find very quickly is that the recommendations it makes about what you might look at other than the things you've selected for are very much reinforcing of the things that you've already looked at. The algorithm doesn't offer you diversity. It offers you an even narrowing path of content, and if you make the mistake of pausing too long or clicking on something that's a little bit regrettable, you will very quickly find your feed infused with more of that and more of that. A 2021 study by the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, which is an international non-for-profit, showed that 2/3 of the content opposing vaccines and vaccinations shared on Facebook globally, Facebook and Twitter globally, originated from just 12 people. So, we're operating in really large groups. There's a power in being perceived to be a victim if you're willing to be soulless enough to claim that when it's not yours. And we're living in an information ecosystem which drives us to further and further extremes. Shall we talk about good things? Let's do that. So let's talk about taking care. And I want to suggest, again, I don't have a silver bullet. What I've got is some things that I suggest we think about, and there's three of them. So firstly, amidst all of this pretty basic human psychology, one of the things that we might ask is, what are our duties to each other? And for me, the duties line what actually contributes towards us being resilient human beings, resilient families, resilient communities. If we are resilient, we have a chance to flourish. And the academic research shows that resilience is the greatest predictor of positive life course outcomes, which is the technical language for you're going to get through in one piece. Right? Yeah. And according to my dear friend Richard Poulton, he said the academic research on resilience is pretty solid. It's pretty stable. It's gone through peer review. Everybody's looked at the basic research and it holds up really well. And it's made up of around 6 things. And I want to talk about 3 in particular. So, they are the development of self-regulation, which is the ability to control how you think, feel and behave at the right neurodevelopmental age, which is probably 3 or 4. And language skills in early years life. The stable relationship with a positive adult presence during childhood. Minimum familial wealth probably means owning your own home. with debt, but it's the security of the asset and the ability to understand that you can pay off debt and will be fine at the other end, right? So we know, for instance, university students, it's upper middle class and middle class kids who go to university because they can cope with the idea of a student loan. Kids from low-income families who've never had family debt successfully managed or owned their own home have not had a lived experience of persisting through the debt to get to the positive circumstance, and then the debt turns into nothing over the decades. And so they stay away from it because the student loan is frightening. Yep. Strong social cohesion. So social cohesion is the strength of relationships and the solidarity within a community. Fundamentally, do you have a network? Social capital, shared group resources, both soft and hard. Are there things happening? So one of the things we know is that geography is a kind of destiny. If you're a child living in Mataura, the social capital available to you compared to a child living in Māori Hill is radically different. It doesn't matter how good your networks are, there just isn't those assets there for you to engage in the library, the pool, the stadium. And finally, when you do need help, it comes in the form of the alliance. Not somebody who turns up and says, I'm going to fix you, but somebody who says, there is this problem, let me and you work on this together. So of these, 3 of them are about this idea of our common life. Social capital, social cohesion, and our alliances. And the 3 of them conspire to support the other 3 factors of resiliency: the early years development, the minimum familial wealth, and a stable relationship with a positive adult presence are all supported. We should recognise how resentment sets about trying to destroy all 6 of those factors, particularly destroying pathways to financial stability. We just have to think about our housing market. Pulling away eligibility or the quality of community assets through commercialisation, reducing our connection. Think about when they were first going to build the South Dunedin Library, there was going to be meeting rooms up the top and it was all going to be free, and now it's charged. Right? That's that. Reducing our connections, and particularly the diversity of our connections through commercialising our common spaces. We have fewer and fewer central social district places where we can meet and be, where we're not charged to be in that space. And of course, help frequently becomes punishing rather than uplifting, and we only have to look at how the political wind shifts how work and income engages with its client base. Where, what are they talking now about? Prepaid cards, which have half your benefit on, but people's rent is 2/3 of their benefits. So, it just seems set up to create distress. So, I think we feed each other when we feed these social capital, social cohesion, and the building of alliances, and we need to recognise that resentment tries to destroy those things. There is, however, no particular recipe for how we go about doing that. And there's a theorist, Douglas Hess, in 1999, who wrote a PhD about this, who he'd reviewed all of the literature on social change and came up with basically 3 core activities. And what he suggested was that actually coming together, finding our leadership, finding our voice, determining what we want and need, these are in fact the acts of strength and of resiliency. These are the acts of defiance against those oppressive forces. But individually, this is my second proposition, there are some much more local tools. So this is a resource from a book in 1964. I did not read it when it first came out. It took took a few years, called Games People Play. It's a book by a guy called Eric Byrne, where he introduced the idea of transactional analysis, and he contributed an idea called the drama triangle, in which there are 3 victim states which individuals pass through to seek and express dysfunctional power in group settings. And he said that individuals flip between these states to maintain control. And on the surface of it, the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor don't all sound like victim states. But that's just because you've never met a true martyr to the cause, or sat in front of somebody ostensibly helping you who says, this hurts me more than it hurts you, and if you're going to sit like that, I'm just going to shove the thing in, right? So, trust me, they can all be persistently victim states, right? So, the classic victim convinces themselves and others they cannot do anything. They want to escape true feelings and acknowledge change, and the inner narrative is poor me. The rescuer's goal is to help and solve somebody else's problems, and I must help, and it turns up as over-caring and can have negative effects. It can keep victims dependent and doesn't allow permission to fail and experience the consequences of their own choices. So it can be a very powerful position. And the persecutor's inner narrative is, it's your fault, I'm doing this to you. They can be controlling, critical, blaming, and angry. And if blamed in return, will almost certainly switch roles and become a victim. The other part of this is when somebody picks one of these 3 roles, they force the rest of us to pick one of the other 2. Very few of us want to be a perpetrator, so if somebody decides to be a victim, we often wind up being a rescuer, and it goes nowhere and it's not helpful. Right? So he also suggested that there were much more powerful responses to these 3 states. Responding to victims as a creator, switching to outcome-oriented rather than problem-oriented. Let's not fix this thing. Where do you want to be? How do you want to get there? What will it look like? What will it feel like? Resolving the dynamic tension, the difference between the current reality and the envisaged goal by taking small steps. Rescuers, let us not be victims or persecutors for them. Let us respond as a coach. Let us ask questions that are intended to help them make choices for themselves rather than solve the problem for them. And for persecutors, we should challenge. We should push them to clarify their needs and focus on their learning and growth. And we'll come back to that in a bit. So, we've had coming together as a group, and we've had individualised responses. This is a lovely young man, Yanaton Zunga, who said that tolerance is not an agreement to live in tolerance is an agreement to live in peace, not an agreement to be peaceful no matter the conduct of others. A peace treaty is not a suicide pact. In liberal society, where we espouse values of tolerance and acceptance, does that not get used against us? Why are you not putting up with me being absurd? I think we need to remember it's a peace treaty, not a suicide pact. And Schelling in 1960, I'm going to offer you a little bit of military analysis here, said that all war is a bargaining failure. Either poor communication, poor commitment, or an inability to share. So let's dig into these. There is no peaceable lying down in the era of resentment, grievance, and intolerance. Handing our lunch money to a bully is only guarantee that they will demand it again tomorrow. Yes. Those who are consumed by selfishness and the power of resentment will not simply give up while they are being rewarded for that. So we must ensure that those people understand our resolve, our ability and willingness to act. We must treat their threats as credible, not theatrics. And I think this was a mistake made with Trump repeatedly. And we will have to be creative in defining that which we are fighting over. not accept their terms of this is what we are fighting for, but create our own. So, coming back into shelling just for a little second there, we talk about, let's think about Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine and thinking it'd be over within 3 days. Boy, did he get that wrong, right? He did not understand the resolve of the Ukrainian people. If he had known in advance, would Russia still have invaded? Would they have done it in that way? When we look at conflict, are people able to make their resistance look credible and genuine and based in reality? And can we change the nature of the pie that we're fighting over? So my last thought about how we take care in an era of resentment is by being firm in our knowledge of who we are and about how we want to be in the world, by espousing assertively our commitment to the inherent God-given, indivisible, inalienable dignity of each person, but particularly as the Beatitudes encourage us, the meek, the merciful, the pure of heart, and the peacemakers. Not necessarily as individual populations, but as characteristics of a whole population. We take care by ensuring those who would otherwise render the world a mean-spirited, hateful, resentful place, that they understand our willingness to share, our commitment to love, hope and dignity, and to ensure that they cannot mistake our resolve in pursuing those blessings for all. But more than anything, we take care by doing all of these things together, not individually. Thank you.
Laura, would you be willing to take questions?
So let me just say, when Donald asked me to do this, he said to me to try and be provocative, so I hope I put a little bit down there.
Have you some questions? This is not an option where everybody's going to sit silent for the first 5 minutes.
Can I give one example? I was at the airport. This afternoon, and a couple sat down. They were obviously from England. They had just left the international airport, run all the way to the domestic airport, was about to get on the plane when the lady discovered her phone was missing. You could imagine the awful feeling. So we were sitting there and she was panicking, and I said, well, has your husband got a phone? So he rang her phone, and it was on the desk at a shop, and they are going to send the phone through to them. We forget that there are 6 billion people on earth, but an awful lot of us are being kind, loving, caring, and that's just one tiny, example in one moment of the day. So turn off the news. Don't worry about it. It'll finish.
And I think you're absolutely right. And we don't tell enough of those stories, right? Because our brains are wired for danger. We treat as background noise the good things. But when we're confronting the kinds of forces we're seeing at the moment, actually we need to be assertive in telling those stories to each other, to reminding each other about the kindnesses, because it reminds us that we are a majority. Yeah? And we are not individuals isolated slogging through this stuff alone. And I think that's, the core of we've got to remember who we are. Thank you.
Kia ora, Laura.
Kia ora.
Can you tell us a bit about how this applies to the work of Methodist Mission South?
Yes. I'm in the middle of having a major budget fight with a government funding agency, so I'm experiencing the meanness at the moment. And I see that David Seymour has stood up today and decided that teaching of tikanga and the place of tangata whenua in early childhood education will now be optional. So there's plenty of meanness floating through our lives right now. In terms of the positive stuff that we do, the Engage program that we're now in half of all of the early childhood education centres in New Zealand with teaches self-regulation to 3 and 4-year-olds. So we've currently got 17,500 kaiko, early childhood education teachers, learning a very robust, simple technique that makes sure every one of the 63,000 children born every year develop that resiliency at the right time, when between 18 and 23% of them otherwise wouldn't. So when in our youth transition houses, we look to plug the young people that we're working with into those that social capital, those assets that are out there, and to build networks for them. And we always work in an alliance. We've got a whole lot of tools that drive us to do that. Some of the staff hate it, but we do it anyway. But both, yeah.
Thanks, Laura. I think the most important lesson I've certainly learned this evening is that I've thought of resentment as being the priority of the losers, but in fact, everything you've said draws attention to me to the fact that those who win have scores to settle.
Yeah.
That's a very simple but increasingly common feature of manifestos.
Yeah.
Is that after we've won, look out.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, on the occasions when we've had programs working with prisoners and with beneficiaries and people in that space in life, it's a very small percentage of them who feel hard done by. Mostly the presentation you get from that is, I might have contributed to what's going on for me now, but I need a bit of help and I want to try and do it differently and better. Whereas the moneyed class are full of, it's not fair. So we've been having this fight with Housing and Urban Development, the ministry, for 8 months now. And it's impossible to get them to respond to an email or a phone call or do it on time, and they keep telling me they'll be in touch tomorrow, and then they'll tell me a week later that they'll be in touch the day after, and this goes on and on and on and on. And when I do get hold of them and I say things like, perhaps I might talk to your boss instead, what I hear from them is, you don't know how hard it is to be us. We're having such a terrible time at the moment. And the conversation that we're having is about homeless teenagers and how they want to cut funding. And it seems utterly disconnected. Now, I get that it's not nice to go through restructuring, and I get that they have their anxieties, but they're losing a sense of context. That these are people who are better educated, better paid, more comfortable, older, with more networks and more assets by a factor of 5 compared to the group they're supposed to be taking care of. When I go to Wellington, and you'd think the plague had ripped through. You know, 5% of public servants have lost their jobs, and it's been tough. But it's like going to a funeral. We were arguing about people whose benefit is $326 a week, and that's all they've got to live on. So increasingly, resentment has become the privilege of the powerful. And I'm not sure if it's because resentment causes them to be dislocated from the rest of us, or they're dislocated from the rest of us and that allows resentment to arise, or whether it's one of those things where they're both swirling at each other madly and it just takes off. But it's not good.
Thanks. It's a really interesting talk, actually. I'm wondering whether there's another side to this. I mean, you've made quite a convincing case that people in power have got the ability to define themselves as victims. I mean, that's what it's all about. If you can define yourself as a victim, you can do stuff. And you've made that case pretty convincingly. I wonder whether there's another side to it. That the people that are quite successful, probably a lot of the people here in that sense, also think that they're successful. They convince themselves that they're successful because they're clever or good at doing what they do. I mean, it comes up in this housing affordability thing, which has got to be so pretty critical, I think, in the whole world actually, but in Dunedin and New Zealand it's quite bad. There's a tendency to, I mean, there's actually quite a simple explanation for what's caused property prices to rise so much. I mean, I call it fake wealth, basically. I live in a house that's probably, so the rates notices tell me is worth $800,000 or $900,000. I bought it 40 years ago. I think it was about 130 or something like that. Same house. Now, that rise in value is not due to anything I've done, particularly clever. So there's a tremendous political, there's just a fairly narrow aspect of what you've been talking about. But when you talk about the issue of tax, for example, on property or wealth or something like that, people say, oh no, we've earned it, we've done this, and all that kind of thing. In actual fact, they haven't. Some of them have. They've probably been better at doing things than some people, but there's a tendency to blame the real victims, which is the people that are living on the tents in the Oval or can't pay the rent down at the bottom of Maiden Street.
But also, this is about the disconnect, isn't it, right? So I think I work really hard at my job. And bits of it are incredibly stressful, and I worry a lot, and I have to do difficult things. And I think it is absolutely nothing compared to the lives that are being lived by some of the people we work with. But unless you can see, unless there's a common life where we can see each other, people in my profession, management, don't know that that's there. The context is I worked harder than you, I'm more successful than you, right? And so we are, it's not that particularly the lives of successful people are easy, it's that other people's lives are horrifically hard and we lose sight of that because we're not connected. You know, housing's a market, right? Supply and demand. And what's happened has, the middle class has pulled up the drawbridge behind it because with restricted planning, we keep voting for local authorities who won't intensify, who won't disturb the leafy green suburbs, and so house prices are artificially high because we all like that. We vote for that because we're powerful, right? The way to solve the housing problem is to unrestrict. If you go to places in Canada, they're doing astonishing stuff just by changing local planning rules. Austin, Texas, which has other problems, obviously, Austin, Texas has seen house price deflation. They've built so much stuff. And they've managed it by changing the planning rules. So the stuff is solvable and we don't solve it because we see ourselves and our own concerns, and that bubble isn't penetrated by the concerns and needs of others. And where do we go to see each other? Well, we go shopping. And the store owners know that we want a nice experience, so they make sure there's nobody sleeping in the doorway overnight. Like, it's a self-reinforcing thing, right? And then you get on the bus, or you're walking behind somebody who hasn't washed for a few days, and it's terrible. And I've got to tell you the story about this dreadful thing that happened to me today. I had to walk behind somebody who was smelly. We lose our empathy. But we can choose not to be like that. I mean, you remember, who was that MP who got turfed out of Parliament for shouting drunkenly at a waiter, "Don't you know who I am?" Right? Now, there's somebody desperately wants to be a victim on 140,000 a year. There's a willfulness to it. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk, but how do we not have resentment? Anybody I speak to today is all against Mr. Trump. Yet if we are Christians, should we be turning the other cheek?
Well, and I come back to, tolerance is not a suicide pact. Yeah? And I'm going to forget it, but the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers, yes, we should not be ashamed to stand assertively for those. And in the Beatitudes, isn't it? Is it Mark who also has woes? There are the woes and the Beatitudes as well as the blessings. Yeah. We've got to remember Jesus was fairly assertive on a number of occasions. Yes. We get to decide who we will love and what we will love and what we will allow to flourish. And those lacking in mercy, those lacking in humility, those lacking in peacefulness are the people we need to show that we disagree. But
Jesus has to tip over the table in the church.
I think the first thing that Jesus, well, not the first thing, but he became more than one man. He had the disciples, he had the followers, he became a movement. We don't fight this stuff as individuals. We fight it by refusing to be separated into our tiny little individual pods. We fight it by standing together and saying, we are more than you. And I think it's really interesting, if you look in the States, Columbia University has basically collapsed because they took a backward step. And Harvard has said, come on, if you think you're hard enough, sunshine. Yeah. And the administration's already backing off from Harvard. Yeah. So you do not, the one thing we know about bullies, and selfishness is a form of bullying when it's like that, is if you give them your lunch money today, you're going to be doing it again tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So we can refuse with love. Nobody here is suggesting that, we send in some ninja warriors to take out Mr. Trump, right? Yeah. But regardless of their acts, we believe in the dignity of every individual, including Elon Musk and Mr. Trump. Yeah. We will still love them for that, but we will refuse them together. Sorry. Get up.
Laura, I know Katie, your partner, so I was really interested in the transactional analysis which I use for my clients. I took great hope in when you're saying we don't just lie down and take things. I think we can do things individually. Today I went to a semi-mediation of something that I didn't think was fair, and I declined and refused to go to the next step because I felt it was bullying, and I work with fierce self-compassion as well as tender self-compassion, and that was fierce self-compassion. it wasn't good for my health. And it wasn't going to make any difference anyway. So I think as an individual as well as groups, we can be assertive. We can look after our own dignity as well as the dignity of others.
Absolutely. And I want to confess now, I've moved to buying New Zealand mayonnaise rather than Hellmann's, because that was the American product in our household. I mean, there are absolutely these individual acts, right? But it's the choosing as individuals to act in concert. Yes, where the power lies. And well done you for taking care of yourself.
Listen, that book in the story of the living wage movement, telling you how to do things.
There's lots of resources, you know. Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky, the civil rights movement in the state, but also 300,000 people, of which I was at least two, sent in submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill. More, by a factor of 10, for any other bill ever in New Zealand. And then when the Select Committee decided it wouldn't publish them all, we forced them to do that as well. So there are instances available to us. Greg?
I think going back to Pope Francis, he was one who did champion love, hope and dignity.
Yeah.
And I think now that he has died, his legacy will continue to inspire those things. Similarly with Peter Matheson, it seems like when someone dies, suddenly you appreciate them more in an ironic sense of what they stood for.
Yeah.
But another woman who did champion those things was the Episcopalian woman bishop, who soon after Trump was appointed had him in her congregation, and she carefully crafted her sermon to ask for not only Trump but everyone, to have mercy and to care for the stranger. And she was asked by President Trump to apologise. How dare she? So that was an example of his resentment against her proclamation of the gospel. And she refused to apologise, so she is doing exactly what you said. She's countering his arrogance, his selfishness, his blindness, with standing firm in her faith and backed up by millions in her church.
And in fact, she offered to meet with him and explain her sermon to him if he wanted it. So there's the coach, right? And Pope Francis, also, I think, a master of what's called shade, because the day before he died, he met with the Vice President of the United States to give him a lecture on immigration. That's Camilla. And with love, with calm, not shouting, with warmth, all of those things, but with soul and with knowledge and with prayer. So there are those people, but also we have to acknowledge there are days when it's too much. We have to take care of ourselves, right? And part of being, when we can, not just individuals, but part of the movement is we understand that other people are there to take the load time to time when we can't. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and we do what we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It becomes my pleasure on behalf of everybody sitting here to make you a small token, not as a negotiation process, but simply as a gift for your wisdom and your grace to us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody does want a copy of the slides.
And thank you very much for turning up tonight. It's been a cold night, and as the winter progresses, it too will progress downwards in temperature. We have got an interesting lineup coming this year, and I won't divulge anything about June yet. That's right, I don't know yet.
Sorry, I'm just really
Why not?
Well, it was a struggle at the beginning, but it came right.
Well, that's not
This was
But so that's what I'm trying to George and I couldn't find a few down here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's, yeah. What's going on there?
The door
I was just saying that about the house. That's what I'm house. That's
yeah, well, it was a word we also that I would be a like George we couldn't make
It's true. It's true. Well, they think there's something unusual about can't be rid of that time.
So we had an extension.
Thank
See, once it gets really